In order to shape a society into a sick version of it, the truth has been disabled. The truth has to be disabled and turned into a web of lies. The lies have to be created in such a form that they perfectly fit people's insecurities and they perfectly feed into the people's egos. If a population is kept for long enough under the necessity to survive, people will be programmed to live under the getting used to that survival is the only thing to do. It's the only state that one can be. Even if there are people who will speak the opposite, in many cases people get so used to a certain thing, they embrace the prison of what they are facing. Because many people are suffering on this world, but unfortunately they turn that into a comfort zone because they are becoming more and more uncomfortable with anything else. Anything that would make their life better would basically mean a kind of a death to them. Now, in life, there are multiple deaths because the point is, people call this an ego death, but basically, it's not an ego death, it's just a transformation. Because the ego is something that one creates. It's one that is also supported by others, yes, by opinions and things that one accumulates through life, but ultimately, the programming that one gets early on is usually hard to get over. And programming is nothing else but a cycle. One can call it karma, one can call it cycle, any way they want, it's still a cycle. Because it always happens and it comes back in circles until someone is capable of transcending it. While life chooses to enter a physical body and go through such karmic cycles, that is a journey on its own. Life is not easy to understand for the mind because most of the things relating to life are beyond the mind. But in society, the idea of white knighting is, well, the term is, in terms of vocabulary, it is quite new, or maybe new, but the point is, it's always existed. White knighting is said to be that aspect when some people or one person chooses to fanatically defend someone else even if they kind of don't want it, right? The other person or the other group kind of don't want it. It's a kind of an aggressive move in a way because it um, wants to preserve a certain state of control. Because when you want to protect someone, the point is you don't want to protect that specific someone, you want to protect the specific values that you like regarding that person. And when you want to protect something, your mind goes haywire, especially if you're not capable of understanding your imagination. Many people say they can control their imagination. Yes, controlling it is one thing, but not letting it overcome you, that is much harder. Because many people end up fooled by imagination, because imagination and the mind can create things in such a vivid way that many people will fall for that as if they are truly real. The mind can present certain things like premonitions, but usually those are extremely rare, and one has to be sufficiently in tune with the universe to actually achieve such things, especially at a more frequent basis. So when it comes to white knighting someone, the point is that person is not being defended. Those values that someone else finds important are being valued. So for example, society is white knighting everyone who is suffering or who has some insecurities. People who have insecurities, they will always want to isolate themselves. And if you want to isolate yourself, this society is perfect for that because it has all the distractions possible to keep you locked in. It locks you out of your private life and locks you in to a so-called public life. People spend a lot of time on social media, and social medias are technically the best white knights for these people. Why? Because they are preserving people in a certain state. So many people fake their lives on social media and they spend so much attention, right? Because white knighting is never done for free. There is always something that is required, right? There is always something that is requested. Sure, usually this is a silent language, but in a way, yanderes are also white knights, right? If we are to enter the anime genre this time. Because technically, what white knighting means is a codependency. You really like something, not someone. Let's not misunderstand things. You like someone, but you like some things about them, right? Because in terms of yandere, since I still mention this, they are, well, let's say, well known for their um, let's say, core features. Technically, they are described as incapable of having emotion. Well, I would describe this as more likely euthymia, because many people say that type of people can't feel emotions or actually don't have emotions. There is no such thing as something that doesn't have emotion. Emotion means energy in motion, it flows through literally everything. So the point is, even inanimate objects have a sort of emotion. Well, they may not have their own emotions, but if humans or living beings with a physical body capable of withholding emotions, well, the point is, any emotion that you manifest simply bombards the surrounding area. So people who are sensitive can actually pick up on that. That is why you suddenly may feel afraid in a certain place without anything truly spooking you, right? So white knights technically do everything possible to make sure that something is not changed. Okay, it is an aspect of ignorance because it is fighting against change. Change is the, well, only only constant in this universe, right? Everything changes in this world. So if everything changes, you have to be ignorant to simply fight against change because you're fighting against the so-called universe. The universe has done well without you, wouldn't you say? Because ultimately, you haven't created anything of this. You may have created some devices or certain things on this planet, but remember that this planet is nothing else than a speck of dust in this universe. So it's not that you or the planet are insignificant. Each of these actually have their role. But ultimately, if we are to compare ourselves with the scale of the larger things out there, we are simply just puny insignificant pieces of dust. That is why I used and how I would use the insignificant part, right? Because this word should not be attributed to the fact that you are insignificant as a whole, right? Compared to the universe and to its scale and grandeur and whatever, in a way, yes, everything is kind of puny. But at the same time, we are all great creations of, let's call it the creator forces. So the point about white knighting is it presents therefore a codependency. At the same time, it presents a will for attention because ultimately, when you spend attention towards something and at the same time you're ignorant, you want attention back. Because attention seeking or people pleasing, they are ignorant aspects. Why? Many people would ask because while you are tending to some of the needs of the others, you're kind of going against one of the main rules of this universe. You're misusing your own body, right? You're misusing who you are. Because while people pleasing is a phase of life that, well, most people need to go through because, well, it actually helps you build boundaries if your family wasn't capable of teaching you how to build boundaries, but at the same time, it's a phase that needs to be ascended because if one remains in there, they live the cycle continuously, right? They live it for far more. And that is how they become more or less white knights. There are multiple variations of that, but ultimately it's an aspect of codependency. It's an aspect of love seeking. So the greater scale usually goes towards, aggressive codependency. And, white knighting is actually an aggressive behavior. Even if it's not shown in terms of physical violence, usually it has some sort of emotional violence. Because if you want someone to not change, you don't want them to move away, right? Because change doesn't mean they will simply change their behavior. People also change their behavior because of, planetary upgrades, the world adjusting itself to a greater level of awareness, and different cosmic events that happen. A person can also change because of different needs that they suddenly realize in their life. Or, well, a new age has hit and suddenly everything that they liked slightly changes or changes dramatically, and they need to follow a different course in life. So, out of a fear of them changing, you will definitely want to keep them in a kind of a time bubble that preserves them the way you have seen them. Now, when it comes to isolation, many people isolate themselves because they think they are worthless, and because they think everyone else is worthless, because your opinion on yourself is how you will project on your others as well. Once you have people who isolate themselves, they will simply become more and more emotionally numb. So the problem is, the first thing in their life that triggers an emotional response in them will basically be like a kind of a little savior. That's what technically triggers the idea, for example, of yandere, since I, well, uh, you know, mentioned it. The point is, yanderes also present an aspect of sociopathy, more or less, and with sociopathy, you don't mess with that person's wounds. So technically, one's life kind of gets sealed by this, because if they trigger an emotional response in that being, right, they kind of, well, I can't say seal their fate, but, as of animes go, it's more or less something like that. Because finally having felt an emotion, they become dependent on that emotion. And that emotion, they logically perceive it as having been supplied by that being. And did I just say supply? Well, yes. Whoever is looking for emotional supply is more or less a vampiric being, right? Because having become so devoid of emotional existence, right? Having become so void of life, one actually needs to feed some life back into them, right? So that's why you have all sorts of, vampiric people, women or men, it doesn't matter. They both have this siphoning aura, right? As soon as they get close to you, you're like instantly feeling drained because they like it. It's revitalizing them, but it's always to the detriment of the others because it's not a balancing factor. Well, it is actually one, but it is a very violent one. It's like you're staying near radiation. What radiation is, it's technically a highly unstable chemical, a highly unstable substance that has a very great lack of electrons, and it's like a pulsar or a pulsar, a very small star, but it has a very dense gravity because, well, it is highly imbalanced. It will seek to balance itself by simply stripping matter apart from others so that it supplies itself with what it needs. So, in this whole spectrum of disorders that can be, I'm not saying white knights are necessarily yanderes, but they may tend to have some peculiar resemblances, because many of them become even capable of killing for the so-called supply they have. The point is, if you are capable of killing for something, it means, well, it's a perfect synonym of being able or capable to die for something. Giving your life for an ideal, if it is done in a conscious way, it means that that ideal has become greater than you. So you are pursuing something which is greater than you. If that is pursued in an ignorant way, it means you are pursuing something which is below you. Because in ignorance, you are not capable of discernment. You are simply reacting to things, and you are allowing pains and so many other things to simply control you. Because in ignorance, there is simply no boundary. There is simply no protection. Ignorance means accepting everything without discernment. So that is kind of it. In a world that is sick, the point is, if you don't support something which nourishes you, you will easily fall for something that nourishes other people. And that is how white knights are. How can you figure that? Because white knighting is always done for an external source. You will never see people who white knight themselves. Those can be more or less narcissists, because technically they are the ones who supposedly white knight themselves. But if someone is as tormented as narcissism requires one to be so that they reach that level of distortion, the point is they will not take much care of them. While they may take some care of their physical body, the point is how they treat others is how they treat themselves ultimately. So white knighting is a very broad term. It is to be taken into account quite lightly because you don't mess with the aspect of sociopathy. You don't mess with people's pains. You just not pinpoint them, but showcase that there is something they may actually change. You don't present anything as a must to be changed because you are not here to change people. You are here to present yourself as a beacon. And as long as you're doing that, you will shape people in an indirect way. You will make people see that it can actually be better if they present themselves in a more favorable way. Now, obviously, this will not necessarily impact everyone, but it will have a long-term effect. Because ultimately, why one came in this world is to be who they are. The more you seek validation from others, because white knighting also requires some sort of validation from others. It's a kind of senpai notice me relationship, right? You're doing everything possible so that someone else apparently notices you, because basically what you're in is preserving those things that you like about someone, right? Think about people who white knight a certain streamer. They like them mostly because they are playing their own game. So if they are bored of the game, they simply can spend time looking at the other person, how they experience the game. And if that person would start saying, well, I'm getting bored of the game and I want to join another game, well, that's when things can become a bit annoying because, people will fight against your change, right? So remember that white knighting does not target a person. It targets a certain set of aspects regarding them that are seen as values by those who are white knighting. All this being said, hopefully this video was introspective enough. You are appreciated. Take care. Ferenjan Board signing out.